All right, creationism versus evolution. Salinity, the measure of salinity, points more often and more convincingly toward the creation side of the question relative to the amount of salt in the sea and the prospective ages that each model, creation is a recent creation, and evolution is a long-term, millions, billions of years solution or model. How much salt is in the sea that points to either one? We can go to there. Let's go with this file name, K15.htm. Oops. Guess we got to take out the caps. How about that? K15.htm. There you go. Caps make a difference. We just covered most of this page up to the point of salinity. Previously, we looked at marine life did survive the universal catastrophic flood. And we went to water life has specific physiological and ecological requirements, just like terrestrial life. A catastrophe the size of the flood would certainly bring with it gigantic proportions, affecting the very survival of many species. And indeed, the fossil record indicates that many taxonomic groups became extinct during the deposition of the geologic sedimentary layers. Some organisms would have simply succumbed to the trauma of the turbulence. Others would have found suitable living space destroyed and hence died for lack of appropriate habitat. For example, too much fresh water for obligate bound to marine species, or vice versa, would have had led to death of those unable to adapt. Not only are there salt concentration problems, but also temperature, light, oxygen, contaminants, and nutritional considerations. These must all be evaluated in discussing survival of water-dwelling creatures. So we work into salinity. Fish have a problem in balancing the fluids outside their bodies with those inside. In general, freshwater fishes are constantly getting too much fresh water in their bodies from food, drinking water, and tissue transfer. On the opposite side, marine fishes get too little fresh water to maintain fluid balance due to the large input of salt in the drinking water and constant osmotic pressure to draw fresh water out of these tissues into the surrounding sea. The kidneys and gills are the two organs used to manage this balance. If a freshwater fish gets too much water, then the kidney is called upon to dump as much water as possible while retaining the circulating salts. Marine bony fish have to get rid of the excess salts largely through the gills and conserve the internal water through resorption. Sun-run trout move from seawater to freshwater to spawn, while eels do just the opposite. Both have to have the ability to reverse their removal of water and salt according to the amount of salt in their environment. Amazing. So there's an intelligent design there that screams. Sunfishes and cod remain in freshwater and seawater respectively for their whole life cycle. Salt content might range from nearly 0 in freshwater to 35 parts per thousand in seawater. Obligate freshwater fish typically have an upper lethal level of 7 parts per thousand. Obligate marine species have a very narrow limit of salt tolerance. Dromus, running and migrating species, are able to adapt to the new environments by osmotic regulation. Very interesting adaptation or mechanism. Was it created ahead of time, or did it have to evolve with many, many millions of failures on the way in, which is a lot of time, maybe older than the universe is old for some of these species to develop these mechanisms, or perhaps it was an intelligent designer. In any case, the author says he sees no reason at all to postulate that the salt content of the ocean at the time of the flood was as high as it is now. In fact, on the basis of the canopy theory, we would most certainly expect that the salt content of the ocean before the flood would be diluted perhaps by 1/2. So salinity doesn't appear to be a problem according to the design we see within species. Temperature. The range of temperatures tolerated by fishes varies from species to species in the assorted habitats. Some fish have a very narrow range of tolerance at the cold, warm, or hot temperature parts of the heat scale. Others show a wide range of heat tolerance from freezing waters to hot waters. Development stages are infrequently limited by narrow temperature requirements within the overall range of the adult. Most species, including cold water types, can tolerate at least brief exposures to 24 degrees centigrade and low temperatures approaching 2 degrees centigrade, as long as there are prolonged acclimation periods, several days to weeks. Preferred temperatures for the representative adult fish are as follows. We have trout, sunfish, catfish, eel, codfish, and so on. It's very specific and unique. Each fish seems to have a unique design. Turbidity. So particulate matter that is in suspension in natural waters is measured photoelectrically as turbidity. It consists of erosional silt, organic particles, bacteria, and plankton. Some materials adversely affect fish by covering the substrate with a smoldering layer that kills food organisms and spawning sites. In addition, the molar action of the silt damages gills and invertebrate respiratory structures. Fish combat such materials by secreting mucus that carries the particles away. Indirectly, turbidity screens out light and decreases the photozone for photosynthesis. The range of turbidity might be described as clear, 10 parts per million, turbid, 10 to 250, very turbid, 250. Wallen, a scientist, found that many fish species survive turbidities of 100,000 parts per million for 1 week or more. So there is flexibility here. The design is inherent within the species, and when the stress comes in on extremes, they have mechanisms to do those things. Again, a designer, creator, intelligent designer. Survival strategy, run off to the ocean. Heavy rainfall over the land would quickly fill the river basins with torrential flows. These, in turn, would empty out onto the encroaching coastline as a freshwater blanket. Odom 5 refers to situations similar to this as a highly stratified or salt wedge estuary. Such a massive freshwater outflow from the continents would join with the oceanic rainfall to form a halocline or strong density gradient in which fish flushed out from the land aquatic systems would continue to survive in a freshwater environment. Stratification like this might even survive strong winds, if the freshwater depth was great enough to prevent internal current mixing. Thus, a situation might be envisioned where freshwater and marine fishes could survive the deluge in spite of being temporarily displaced. After which, through the draining out of the floodwaters into subterranean basins, many new bodies of fresh water would be formed on the new geography, streams, rivers, ponds, lakes, and so on. Note that only one male and one female of each kind needs to survive in order to continue that kind. This is Eugene P. Odom, Fundamentals of Ecology, wrote this little article. So turbidity flows. On the other hand, large turbid particles and enormous bed loads could move into the ocean as settleable particulate rain and ground-hugging slurries. Heavier particles would fall out in the slower-moving coastal waters, and the mud flows would sediment out over the ocean floor. Although there would be turbulence at the freshwater-saltwater interface, the particle insertion would probably occur without appreciable mixing. With the range of tolerance given above, many fishes might be able to survive extended exposure to high turbidity. We have serendipity at Mount St. Helens. The biotic recovery at Mount St. Helens after the May 18, 1980 eruption demonstrates rapid and widely ranging restoration. Obviously, the flood would have been one or more types of magnitudes greater a catastrophe than that eruption. But such an event does help us to see ways of recovery with regard to the three factors of interest: salinity, approximate alkalinity in the sense of dissolved solutes, temperature, and turbidity, and significant changes were seen in the affected areas, data transformed to units used previously. Still, a little more than a month after the eruption, the lake most exposed to the catastrophic event, Spirit Lake, had tolerable alkalinity, ambient temperature, and low turbidity. This is not to deny that all the endemic fish were killed in the event and probably could have not have survived if replanted in these waters on June 30th, 1980, due to large organic oxygen demands from decaying tree debris and seeps of methane and sulfur dioxide. But within 10 years, the lake appears to be able to support fish, as many other aquatic species are back and well established. If the lake were connected directly to the Toutle River, then salmonids probably would have made their re-entry by this time. Perhaps the most significant observation of this, Mount St. Helens, though, in examining the post-eruption history, is that a variety of habitats within and adjacent to the blast zone survived the event with minimal impact on the continuity of the ecosystem. Meadow Lake, within the blast zone, for example, had an ice cover at the time of the searing blast, which protected the dormant ecosystem from experiencing much disruption from the heat, anoxia, and airfall tempera. Fish and support systems picked up where they left off before the onset of the winter season. Similar experiences were observed in Swift Reservoir, in spite of massive mud and debris flows into the lake by way of Muddy Creek. Personal conversation with aquatic biologist on duty at that time was the source of information on that. Fish were displaced into the adjacent unaffected watersheds or downstream into lower reservoirs. However, within 2 years, massive plankton blooms had occurred, and ecosystem recovery was well underway with migrant recruits. Such a confined catastrophe, about 500 square miles, enables one to project expectations from a major catastrophe like a worldwide flood, such as the flood itself. First, in spite of the enormous magnitude of such events, there appear to be refuges for survival even in close proximity to the most damaging action. Second, recovery can be incredibly fast, from 1 month to 10 years. Third, recruitment from minimally affected zones can occur with normal migratory behavior of organisms. Although some animal and plant populations or even species might be annihilated in such events, remnant individuals can reestablish new populations. Now, plant life did survive the worldwide flood. With respect to the survival of plants through the flood, we have this comment from Walter E. Lamertz, consultant in the Horticultural Research Division of Germains, Incorporated. He says, "I am convinced that many thousands of plants survived either as floating vegetation rafts or by chance burial near enough to the surface of the ground for asexual sprouting of new shoots. I am, of course, aware that objections could be raised on the idea that long exposure to salt water would be so harmful to any vegetation as to either kill it or so reduce its vitality as to make root and new shoot formation impossible. However, I see no reason at all to postulate that the salt content of the ocean at the time of the flood was as high as it is now. In fact, on the basis of the canopy theory, we would most certainly expect that the salt content of the ocean before the flood would be diluted, perhaps by 1/2. Naturally, during the first few hundred years after the flood, the salt content of the ocean would again be rapidly raised because of much of above normal drainage of the land surface." Marsh further suggests that there was doubtless